Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good night to you, no matter where you are watching in the world. I know we have people from around the world who are signed up to this, and that's very exciting to both of us. So first, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's catching this on replay. I know some people couldn't make it live. They sent me messages. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to DM them to me or to Fred, whoever you think can best answer your question. We will be happy to answer those questions for you. So hello, audience members. If you have been thinking about writing a book and you're not sure how to start or finish, or if you're in the midst of a book and you're feeling stuck, today is going to help you out. Because by the end of today's show, you're going to have ideas, strategies, and possible best next steps that you can take to be able to start a book, finish a book, or get through that book that you've been stuck on for quite some time. So a little bit of housekeeping, and I want to say a couple of things, housekeeping intros, and also talk today about the two segments that Fred and I are going to cover. First of all, Fred and I love your questions. I think if you guys know either of us, you'll know we love to help people, we love to serve, and we love to answer questions. So please feel free to put them in the comments below, and then we'll go through and get to as many of them as we can. I also want to share with you a quick tip, just so you have something that you can use and take away and use within the next couple days. So when writing, it's always easier to remove writing rather than try to add writing in if you haven't written enough. So my recommendation based on years of writing is write more than you need, write wide, and then you can always carve things away. It's kind of like creating a marble sculpture. You start with the big hunk of marble, you carve away, you get the pretty sculpture, but you never really try to paste the marble back on. Now, is it impossible to do it the other way from what I'm saying? It's not impossible at all. It's just easier to do it the way that I'm recommending. So if you don't know who we are, Fred Diamond is my guest today. He's the founder of the Institute for Excellence in Sales, the author of 2 books, one about sales and one about Lyme. You'll see the posters behind him for those books. And he's also been the host, or is the host, of the Sales Game Changers podcast, which has had more than 500 shows. So that's all pretty amazing. And Fred, what else should people know about you?
Deborah, it's great to be here. Thank you so much. I am based in Northern Virginia, and I'm also from Philadelphia. So if anybody is from Philly, would always love to meet you as well. And of course, Northern Virginia too. We've had over 1 million interactions in our Sales Game Changers podcast. And one thing that we're most excited about at the Institute for Excellence in Sales is a new designation we have. It's called our Premier Women in Sales Employer. And it's because we have such a strong program. My program director is named Gina Stracuzzi. She's also been a big help with the Sales Game Changers podcast and running this amazing Women in Sales program at the IES.
That's fantastic to know. I've had the pleasure of meeting Gina in person and on LinkedIn, and she is a fabulous person. I'm sure she's wonderful to learn from. So for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Deborah Ager. I'm a book collaborator. I've worked on more than 37 books, and I help leaders raise their profile through their writing, whether that's a book or something else. And in my deep, dark past, I was a poet, and I ran a poetry magazine. So sometimes people are surprised to find that out. So I thought, I'm just going to put it out there, not keeping secrets, anyone. So anyway, so Fred and I are going to have 2 segments today. The first one that we're going to focus on is how to write a business building book. What do you need to know? Why would you bother doing it? How do you get through any challenging sticking points and so on? And then the second part is going to be, how can you make sales more fun, more effective, more enjoyable, and so on. So the first, we're going to dive right in to the first segment, and I'm so excited to learn from Fred about his experience. So Fred, usually authors will come to me and say, writing a book has been somewhat challenging, or it's harder than they thought. And I like to be really open and transparent about the fact that, yes, it does take some work to do it. And there is work that goes into the project. So I'm curious, what did you find particularly challenging as well as helpful in the process?
Yeah, actually, it takes a lot of work to write a book. Now that I have 2 books that are published, I realize there's 2 phases. There's the writing of the book and the physical typing the words, into your computer and thinking about it. And then, of course, all the production with the book. And, you want to make something that is flawless. You want to make something that has no grammatical errors, typos, logical errors, if you will. So it really is a lot of work to publish a book. And publishing the book isn't the the result, marketing the book and getting it into people's hands and interacting with people, particularly on the business book, like the Sales Game Changers, Insights for Sales Game Changers. The reason I wrote that book is I should have written a book. I work with a lot of speakers. We bring a lot of speakers to the Institute for Excellence in Sales, some that have written a dozen books, some that have written their first, typically in sales, how to get better at the art and science of sales. And, I created the IES back in 2012. And for years, I've been saying, like, I got to write a book, but I couldn't quite put my arms around what I could write. And the reason was there's a lot of sales books that are out there, and I haven't created a methodology, right? I haven't created a sales process. So I always thought, what would be, what could I do? I met with one of our members who said, well, why don't you do this? A member of the Institute for Excellence in Sales said, you've done over 500 podcasts. Why don't you do a 15-chapter book with 15 quotes in each chapter? And I said, that's brilliant, because we've been transcribing every Sales Game Changers podcast episode that we've done from episode number 1. So I had at the time, over 490 10-page Word documents ready to be repurposed. So, it was kind of like, it wasn't really, should I write a book? I always knew I wanted to. I just couldn't quite put my arms around what should I do until I had that aha moment with one of our members. And then the next part was the physicalness of writing the book. And if I didn't come across you, there's no way I would have written Insights for Sales Game Changers. Your service in the process and understanding what goes into a book was just essential.
Thank you very much. When we first talked about working together, we talked through that idea that you shared from one of the members. And we also talked through some of the business goals that you were looking to fulfill. So could you talk a little bit about that, like what your goals were? Because that might give some people in the audience some ideas for what they might do.
Yeah, and I want to say something else. You and I actually met, just for a little bit of inside baseball for our listeners here. You and I met 3 weeks before the shutdown in 2020. Yes. I had become aware of you and the service you provided, and I knew that I had transcribed all of these shows. So you and I met in Washington, D.C., and we spent about 2 hours mapping out what could I do with all of this amazing content that I had created through, at the time, it was only 200 episodes of the podcast. And we came up with a great plan, some ebooks, some memes, quote books, if you will. And then, of course, the shutdown happened, the lockdown happened. So we tabled that for a year. And then I said, okay, the best thing for me to do is to come up with a book. And you and I met again, and I had gotten that insights. The value of the business book, again, I get a sales book sent to me every day because of the Sales Game Changers podcast. I get 40 people a week, Deborah, who want to be a guest on the podcast, because we get about 2,500 downloads per show. When I do a LinkedIn post, we get anywhere from 3,000 to 80,000 impressions based on that particular show. So people want to be on the show. For me, my business is based on companies with at least 100 salespeople becoming a partner of the Institute, and they pay anywhere from $7,500 to $30,000 a year to be a partner. And these are companies like Amazon, Salesforce, Red Hat Software, Cvent Software. So I needed to create the book for 3 things. One is to have more validity, right? So the Institute, it's not just they're doing great events, Fred's really smart, et cetera. But when you have a book that you've published, it just adds, I was blown away. I knew it was going to add validity, but I was blown away by how much validity. And only 4 weeks, the book came out towards the end of August, right? Second thing is I can hand this book to prospects. My customers are VPs of sales. They are people who work for those companies. Now, more and more people in recruiting who want to show their employer is a great place to work. People in DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, who want to show that their company is a fair place for all people to consider working, particularly in sales and women in sales. And we get a lot of recruiters and HR people as well. So I can actually physically give them the book. Hopefully they'll read it, right? But at a minimum, it's a added validity. And the third thing is it gives me something to talk about. I can, when you give someone your book, you automatically have a reason to talk. And in sales, which we're going to be talking about in a little bit, sales is really all about getting to the next conversation. right? It's about moving the process forward to the point where the customer will do some type of ongoing series of transactions. So, a book does so much to make that happen.
Definitely. I've been talking to a lot of people lately who want to create books, and one of the questions I've been hearing a lot is the following: does the world need another book? So I'm kind of curious, what's your take on that now that you've authored two?
It's interesting. So the two books that I wrote, Insights for Sales Game Changers, that's going to, like I mentioned just before, hopefully it'll get us more partners into the Institute for Excellence in Sales. The other book that I wrote is called Love, Hope, Lyme: What Family Members, Partners, and Friends Who Love a Chronic Lyme Survivor Need to Know. And that was a personal book. Someone close to me was struggling, still is, with this horrific disease called chronic Lyme disease. And I was driven to write a book that was going to hopefully bring some peace, answer some questions for people. I'm hoping that I get tens of thousands of people buying that book and reading that book. And it's interesting that both books came out on the same day, August 17th, which is just over a month ago. A lot of people knew me for sales because of the Institute for Excellence in Sales on the podcast. Nobody knew me as an author of a book about disease. So, there's been, luckily, I'm a professional marketer, so we're doing a lot of marketing. We've gotten people to review the book. I've reached out to people on Facebook groups where Lyme survivors congregate. But, for people who are saying there's every book out there, that Lyme book that I wrote has never been written before. It's never been written by what I call myself a civilian. I'm not a medical practitioner. I don't have Lyme disease. It's literally the first book that's ever been written by someone who loves and cares for people in the Lyme world. In the sales side, like I told you, I get a sales book every day. I have an expression on my podcast that if one person listens to my podcast, one person listens to my podcast. And if I'm going to make a difference with that one person, it's worth it. Now, I want 1,000 people to listen, to have a more of a breath, if you will. But, we're in this world right now where people are looking for answers for their career, for their health, for their relationships. Writing a book, I've written tons of LinkedIn posts and blog articles, and right now we're up to over 550 Sales Game Changers podcasts. A book just has a different level of tangible credibility. People gather around a book. People are asking me to send them autographed copies of it. So a book in itself just adds so much validity to what you want to do and to help you get the message out there.
That is so true. And just a quick personal anecdote, I co-edited with someone else, another poet, a book of Jewish poetry. And so it came out on Bloomsbury. And the cool thing about that was that we did some research and we saw that there wasn't something comparable to exactly what we were trying to do. And so our goal for that was course adoption. And then also we wanted to have events at cultural centers across the US to get the word out about the book, which is what happened because there's quite a community to support that book. So that's just another idea for anyone who's thinking of writing a book, just another angle, another way of looking at it for what you might consider for yourself or what might make sense for you. It's not, there's not just one path is what I'm trying to say.
I made a quick comment on that, on the Lyme book. It's such a desperate world as people are looking for solutions to a disease that really has no cure when it becomes chronic. Deborah, I had 5 people reach out to me over the last week asking me for medical advice because they just can't find it. And of course, I'm not a doctor by any means. I'm a history major with an MBA. I quickly referred them. Now I've done so much research. I know where to refer people to, but it's just amazing where people are going to try to find information, and publishing the book, even if they never read it, it adds credibility to who you are as people are struggling for so much these days.
Yeah, definitely. And so I feel like this next question is somewhat related, not directly, but indirectly. What would you tell someone if they're worried about what their colleagues would think? Because that's one of the concerns that I hear quite often. Or what will my colleagues think if I, write a book or post on LinkedIn? People are curious about that.
Yeah, you know what? Who cares? So here's the thing. If you don't write a book or if you don't post on LinkedIn, they're not going to think about you.
Yeah.
Right. And, if you're at the point, here's the thing too, I don't want to talk about this too much, but a lot of people suffer from imposter syndrome. And even with the Lyme book, again, I'm not a doctor. I don't have Lyme disease. About 9 months ago, I decided I really needed to understand how this disease impacted someone in my life. And I did a ton of research. I had 50 people review the book. It's interesting. The sales book, I only had you and me, and and I had a copy editor, of course, who reviewed the book because I know sales. I knew all the stuff we were putting in there was correct. You know, you're a tremendous co-writer and an editor, and then my publisher has a crack team of people. So, you know, I knew that what we were going to be publishing was correct. And a lot of it was taken from some of the great information, the interviews we had from the podcast. On the Lyme book, I had 50 people review it. I had 20 people from the Lyme world, including doctors and nurses and nurse practitioners, to make sure that I wasn't saying anything incorrectly. And I had 30 people, friends and colleagues and people I've met from the Lyme world who aren't doctors, read it just to make sure that it was sensitive to what the audience would be thinking about. So the people who were thinking, you know, one of the things that a lot of the authors who I've had speak at the Institute have said to me over the years, and it's a saying at the National Speakers Association, is that you have an obligation to write a book. You have, especially if you're intelligent, that's bringing value, it's an obligation. And I thought about that for years. And now that it's out there and I see how it's impacting people, I get that. You know, it's because you might think, well, everybody knows this. And there's a sales book. I get a sales book sent to me every day. Does the world need another sales book? Yeah, probably not. But you know what? If it's going to impact somebody, if it's going to help someone who's brand new to sales, who's looking for some answers, if it's going to help one of the VPs of sales at an IES member get his people or her people motivated, then there's so much value that you just created.
Definitely. And when people ask me that question, sometimes what I'll invite them to think about is, does the world need another PR firm? Do we need another software development company? Do we need another, you know, whatever it is? And, you know, the answer to, do we need another dentist? So the answer to all of this, we could say no, but it's really about figuring out how are you a specialist in a certain area, like an orthodontist might specialize in Invisalign, or a software developer might specialize in software as a service, or, you know, or something else. So it's like when you become, it's basically what people say about niching. It's about figuring out how you stand out based on your skills and experience. And I want to say hi really quickly to the people who've commented so far. We had Jane, hello, Larry, Keith Steinkamp. So hello, everybody. And if you guys have questions, feel free to put them in the comments below, and Fred and I will be happy to answer them as we go through this. So, and also I just want to note that if anyone is worried, you don't have to have 50 people to review your book, but since Fred's Lyme book was on a medical topic, that was more necessary. But for a lot of books, you know, it isn't necessary to have all that many people. So just wanted to, you know, just in case anyone's got some alarm about that. And Fred, you touched on this a little bit, but I know there was something in particular we had talked about the other day that I thought was interesting. How would you describe the way authoring a book has changed how others saw you? Like, for instance, you mentioned a company had ordered a bunch of copies.
Yeah, you know, a couple things. So I was a little bit of a additional background. I was the editor of my college newspaper, the Emory Wheel, when I went to Emory. And I thought I was going to be a writer. I thought I was going to be a writer. And hey, we have a guest here from London. Hi, London, Nigel.
Hey, Nigel.
So everyone thought I was going to be a writer. And when I got out of college, writers were making $12,000 a year. And I said, okay, I'm not going to be. I expect my first job after college was with McGraw-Hill Publishing. And I just said, there's no way I'm going to be able to survive. I was wrong. I probably could have written books on a niche topic like you just talked about, or had become a journalist. But, you know, it took me then another couple of decades to get to the point where I finally published 2 books. And I've had so many friends and particularly family members who have reached out and said, you know, we always knew you were an author. We were always waiting for your books, and we're all blown away that they're out now. The other thing, too, is it really makes you an authority. I mean, I know I'm an authority on sales. It's mind-blowing to me that I'm an authority right now on Lyme disease, and people are reaching out to me asking me for medical advice. But I'm happy that I can quickly get them to people who can really assist them. Here's the other thing too. I mentioned this before. It's just another reason for you to engage in a conversation, right? You know, you hand somebody a book, and all of a sudden they want to know, like, some of the questions you're asking. Why'd you write this? Tell us about the process. Oh my God! Even me, before I wrote my book, every author that I knew, and I knew tons of them because of the Institute, I would always say, how do you how do you physically write your books? I couldn't get my arms around that. Do you go to Starbucks? Do you sit in your basement? Are you up at 2 o'clock in the morning? And I was like, oh my God, how am I going to get this done? How am I going to physically do it? Deborah, now that I've written two, I don't even remember that process. I don't even remember, any of that. But, and the other thing too is, am I happy that I wrote two books? Of course. Do I walk around the house, wearing a crown and saying, look at me, I'm an author? But if it's giving me a reason to talk to people and about writing a book, if people want to talk to me about writing a book like they talk to you all the time about, I'd love to have an hour conversation with someone who's smart enough and self-aware enough to know that it's something they can do to make the world a better place.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that story you told me about how companies, a company had ordered a lot of books. And I thought that was of particular interest to people who are watching, because sometimes people will say, well, how do I sell a book? And they're thinking about selling books one by one by one. But the cool thing about these business building books is that if you offer training or corporate workshops, these are great assets to have in your company. And it's a common experience for my clients to have a corporation say, hey, come in and do a training, or we want to order 30 copies or 100 copies. And this is the way they sell bulk books. Or maybe they're going to be at a conference, speaking engagement, and maybe that's wrapped into their speaking fee, is having the books, sold as part of their speaking, and it's part of a larger package. So there's a lot of interesting ways to get the book out there besides just Amazon selling one by one by one. So I just want to make sure people understood that.
No, that's a great point. And actually, even the sales thought leaders that are quote unquote, superstars in the industry where I'm at, they'll all say the same thing. Mm-hmm. They have a passion for writing the books because they know so many things, but it's designed to get them in front of new customers, speak at conferences. It's an important part of your marketing program to help build the business that you are running, whatever it might be.
Definitely. Yeah. And I'm curious, so people can understand like what happens behind the scenes, because I promised people in an email I sent we would lift the curtain so people can see behind the scenes, like the Wizard of Oz or something. Can you talk a little bit about how our collaboration helped you, and then what was it that led you to work with me in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had become aware of you through LinkedIn. I had seen you post numerous posts, probably in the 2 years before the pandemic, I guess. It might have actually even been 3 years, I guess. And I was just aware of you, and I had followed every day you were posting something on LinkedIn about writing or something related to publishing books or producing content, I guess. And just became aware of you and knew what you did, and happened to notice that you were local as well. I'm in Northern Virginia. You're in the DC suburbs, I guess, right? Uh-huh. So, I then had seen you once or twice at various networking things around town. So when I realized, okay, Fred, you need to now repurpose a lot of the content I was creating from the podcast, I just reached out to you because I knew this is what you did. And I also saw the credibility that you had with your LinkedIn posts, right? So I saw you every day, and if appropriate, I would make a comment. I would share if it was appropriate. Maybe reach out to you via direct message to ask you a follow-up question, maybe ask you for a connection. That's one of the things that people don't realize. One of the values is with LinkedIn. LinkedIn is basically a marketing, for most of us who do what we do, it's a marketing technique that allows us to be seen as who we want to be seen, mm-hmm. with integrity and value. So that is literally what happened. So when I had this decision, okay, Fred, you need to write a book. I thought it would take me like years if I were to sit in my basement every night in my sweatpants and a t-shirt and, just kind of like plug away. I said, this is going to take years. I wanted to get both books done relatively quickly. I really wanted to get the line book done quickly because I began to understand how that marketplace was suffering. And then I said, well, if I'm going to do the line book, I should also do the sales book that I've been thinking about. So interestingly, hiring you to be my co-writer, and you weren't just a co-writer, you kind of helped me map out what a process is to get a book done, right? It's like building a house. You don't think about all these things. Next thing you know, you have the book, right? But there's outlining, and then there's like, what do I want to say, and what do I want to say next, and what's the flow of chapters, And, you got to be thinking about the audience as well. It's how are they going to read this book? With this Insights for Sales Game Changers, I wanted a book that people could read in an hour, that because most sales professionals, no disrespect to them, they're not going to be spending a whole lot of time reading long, thick books on sales process and things like that. They just aren't going to. And I know hundreds of thousands of them. So I wanted a book that they could read in an hour. I also wanted a book that they could refer to. The way we wrote Insights for Sales Game Changers is we took the 15 most commonly uttered words on our podcast, and then we went back to all the transcripts and found great examples. So, for example, teamwork, partnering, leadership, empathy. And we found some of the great quotes. You helped me kind of think about, well, I think leadership should go first. Do you remember that? I think we had leadership at chapter 15. And then you said, I think you should start with leadership because that kind of sets the groundwork for a lot of the book. So your expertise in having worked, you just said 37 books published, that saved me a ton of time having to process something that I had no access to. The other thing too, I published 2 books, right? I'm the only person in history, the history of the world, Deborah, who published a book on sales performance improvement and Lyme disease awareness.
True.
Not only on the same day, but in their lifetime. Trust me, I know that for a fact. You gave me, by using you as my partner on creating or hiring you as my partner on the sales book, it gave me more time. So I wrote the whole Lyme book from the first word to the last sentence, every word. And of course I had editors who helped me process. And I mentioned the 50 friends and people in the Lyme world, but it allowed me to tackle a topic that I was not aware of by having you as the partner in getting the sales book done. And you got it to the point where I could hand it to the publisher and they could then take it to the next stage, which is getting the book laid out, formatted, cover designed, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It kind of, that's one of the things I think is really interesting about having worked with you is that you were able to work on one book while I was working on the other one. So that way you were able to do 2 in a year. Not that everyone needs to do 2 in a year. I don't want people to panic, but also if, I just want to also note, if you guys are watching this on replay, please put replay down below. And if you're just watching this and want to say hi, please say hi to Fred. And also we love your hearts, your likes, those emojis help other people see the LinkedIn Live. So if you're willing to give us a heart or emoji or like or whatever you want, there's also that confused face now that LinkedIn offers. Whatever it is you want to add, Fred and I would love that. So let's see. We talked about how the book would increase the value of a company. So what I'd love to do now is just roll into talking about the topic of your book so everyone can benefit from your sales knowledge. If you guys have book questions about creating a book, feel free to put them down below. And also if you have questions about sales, like how to do sales better, any questions like that, feel free to put those down below because we're going to transition now into segment 2, which is talking about more about sales in general. So Fred has a ton of experience in the sales world. Also, you founded the Institute. And I'm curious, what do you see as one of the key ingredients that you see missing in a lot of sales conversations that people are having?
Yeah, I just want to do a quick comment. John asked the question, how long did it take me to write the book? And, because of your help, I wrote both books in just under 9 months. So again, you and I had talked before the pandemic about, what we could do with my content. But then when we made the decision to do the book, I believe it was in November of last year, November of 2021. And I decided to write both books. And I got them both done from, I'm going to write 2 books to publish on August 17th in just under 9 months. Okay, so thanks for the question, John.
Oh, wait, can I just take this one from Janine? Hi, Janine. Thank you for joining us. She says, around the Beltway in Baltimore, regarding the personal story, how do you avoid slander when sharing stories that involve others? Well, Fred and I are not lawyers, but I can share with you what one of my esteemed writing teachers shared with me once. He was a memoir teacher. And he said one time one of his students had her book published and she decided it was going to be the day where she was going to have to share it with her parents. And it was a family story. So she sat them down, they read the book. And so she's sitting there, they're turning the pages on the manuscript and reading it. And then they just both go, okay. And then she just thought, okay, this is strange. Well, later she saw them at a party for the book or some kind of family event. So she asked her, and her mother approached her and said, darling, your book is brilliant, but don't you think you're a little hard on father? And so then later, when the mother wasn't around, the father approached her and said, your book is amazing, but don't you think you were a little hard on your mother? So sometimes people won't even recognize what might be, like they'll just see a different way than maybe what you see. So that's one thing to think about, but also fact checking as much as possible. And then if able, having the people read it before it goes to press can also be useful. But I know there's different experiences where sometimes that might not be the best way to go about it. So anyway, there's lots of different scenarios that might affect that answer.
I just want to make a quick comment. For the Lyme book, I had 2 attorneys read the book for that particular reason. First of all, again, I mentioned before, I'm a history major with an MBA. I'm not a medical practitioner. I'm not a doctor. I made it very clear in the book that this is not a treatment book, right? So there are plenty of treatment books out there for Lyme. And we have a very big disclaimer, like on page 3, which says this is not to be used for treatment. Any of the examples here that are used as how people take care of themselves with Lyme is based on my research, and we cited wherever something like that came from. The other thing too is in the sales book, we used excerpts from the transcripts of our podcast. So basically, everybody who was on my podcast approved of the content that they had given us. So I definitely had attorneys read both books. I had 2 different attorneys, like I mentioned, read the Lyme book, just because, first of all, I didn't want to get sued for saying something that people would misconstrue from a medical practice. And we feel 100% confident we took care of that. And the people who I referenced in the Lyme book, there are some people who told stories. I've done some podcast episodes of people with Lyme disease who are in sales. So they were very excited to be on the book to tell a good story about how they've overcome the Lyme disease. And I also had them send me, my lawyer said, all I need is an email from them. I didn't have to create a NDA or anything like that, non-disclosure, but basically it's had them send me an email saying, just let me know that you approve. You've read the book and you approve, and I've gotten all those taken care of. So just to the answer to the question, I would just say from Janine, just cover the base. If you have any thing in the back of your brain that says this could cause me some degree of risk, get an attorney to read it, and then have the attorney reply back with, we find no fault, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, definitely. Keith has a question. What are the 2 best ways to monetize your book? One of them is, if you are someone who sells into corporations, then to include it as part of a training or workshop that you offer in there. If you are a speaker who does speaking engagements, then selling them at the back of the room sales is what they used to call it. And also perhaps have it as part of the package of your speaking engagement. Those are a couple different ways to be able to do that. And then also being willing to talk about it often. So writing about a topic that you love to talk about is important, because you can get out there on podcasts, you can create events on LinkedIn like this one to talk about your book. There's just lots of different ways. Those are just some of the ways you can get the word out about it.
Yeah, I would say 2 other quick things. That's a great question. It's a great answer, Deborah. The business book, there's very few. It's got to be like maybe 0.4% are the kind of books that, have made a fortune on their own, right? Most of the books, and like I told you, I get a book sent to me every day. It's a marketing tool for your business, right? And when people say, should I write a book? I say to them, same thing with the podcast. When people say to me, Fred, you've done over 500 episodes of your podcast. Should I do a podcast? I always say the same thing. I say, if it's going to help you with your business, I have a sponsor. Cox Communications has sponsored a number of my podcasts, and I've been very grateful for that. But it's just, barely covers, lunch a couple times a week. But it's a marketing tool because it's gotten me exposed to the companies I've interviewed on my podcast, people that I want to become members, partners of the Institute. Mm-hmm. Same thing in the book. I have about 100 people from the podcast who I reference in the book, and we're in the process, I should say, of sending each of those people a signed copy of the book, which will hopefully make them look better, which will hopefully ingratiate themselves to me. It would be great to just be a writer and do this from the book, but it never happens, or very rarely happens. But it's got to be used. And the other thing too, I want to focus on what you just said also, you got to be talking about the books too. I see people who write a book, and they're, if you build it, they shall come type of a thing. You got to be saying, on all my stuff on my LinkedIn and my Facebook now, it says 2-time published author. I changed my bio, my LinkedIn description for people who are just getting to know me. As you'll see, my little description, it says, author of Love, Hope, Lime, and Insights for Sales Game Changers. And I talk to everybody any chance I get about either book. And hopefully it's going to lead to some type of introduction to somebody who would be appropriate to be a member of the Institute.
Yeah. And also I was just here, I just read some content recently about hidden networks, or I was talking to somebody about this. I wish I could remember who, because this is excellent. And I would love to be able to credit them, but talked about like hidden networks that we have all over the place. For instance, on the sidelines of your kid's sporting event. Not that you're going to go around and say like, hey, buy my stuff, but people ask what you do, especially in the Washington, D.C. area. And, I told, someone asked me, I told them what I do, and they're like, oh, interesting. I was thinking about writing a book. So you just never know what's going to happen, and or what people might be interested in, or that they might know someone who's looking for what you do. So like I said, you don't want to go around with a megaphone saying like, this is what I do. But like when it comes up naturally in conversation and you're at different events, it's really just about building relationships. And actually that kind of gets me back into talking about the sales part. Fred, I want to ask you this one question in particular. One thing that I especially loved about in the book, Insights for Sales Game Changers, is the way that sales leaders share their insights on prospecting. So for instance, one tip that I really liked was about, as a business owner or as a sales leader or as part of a sales team, do that first thing. Maybe not the sales leader, but you know what I mean. But do the prospecting first thing, and then you can work on the proposals later in the day, but make sure you get that done first. And I surmise it's because it might be something that people put off doing or procrastinate. So it's better just to get that out of the way. Anyway, I really love that tip because I feel like it also applies to a lot of different situations as well. But I was just curious, what's one or two of your favorite tips from the book?
Yeah, there are so many great tips. And again, one of the gifts I was given with the Sales Game Changers podcast is the opportunity to speak to over 550 amazing sales leaders at amazing companies, again, like Apple and Salesforce, et cetera. There were so many great tips. One of the key things that came across every time that we've done the Sales Game Changers podcast, I would ask the VP of sales or the sales leader, what makes you so great, right? Why are you so successful? And one of the common things that kept coming up was that they're a great listener. And I would hear that all the time. And the first couple dozen, I would say, okay, great, good. You're a great listener. Well, tell us something else that you do. And then I started saying, oh my God, this is coming up all the time. And people would say, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in that order. The 66% solution, similar type of thing, 2 ears to 1 mouth. And then I started getting deeper, and I would say, Deborah, okay, well, how do you become a great listener? It sounds simple. Be a great listener. Okay, good. I'm going to be a great listener. Well, you know what? Very few people are great listeners. And there's an expression that we refer to in the book. It's WAIT, WAIT. Why am I talking? And that came from one of our guests on the show. He was quoted in the book. His name is Gary Newgard. He's a VP of sales now at a company called Sumo Logic. He's been at Oracle, Compaq, et cetera. And basically, most people listen for their opportunity to speak, or it's kind of like, interesting. And we call that active listening. Oh, really? What do you mean by that? When in reality, all they're really trying to do is just wait for their opportunity. In sales, the most important thing is to get the customer or prospect to speak. Most people in sales, they want to know, most customers, they find more value in telling you what they just discovered in you telling them what you think they should know. So listening is such a huge skill. And I encourage people to write down on a Post-it note like I have, wait. And I look at that every time I'm on a call, every time I'm talking to somebody. Why am I talking? Mm-hmm. What is the value of what I am saying right now? Now, if somebody asks me a question, obviously there's a reason for me to answer and talk. But in most cases, you want the other person to do the talking. That's one of those secret things of sales that we have in the book that we learned through the through the podcast.
Yeah, and you're right. There are a lot of really great ideas in there. And I love what you said there about listening. I think it's something that we can always work on, especially, with social media apparently making us have shorter attention spans and other other parts of life making us have shorter attention spans, to be able to listen deeply to someone is important. And sometimes people go away from conversations with me, I guess sales conversations, I'll call them, and they'll they'll appreciate having had that attention. And I think it's just something that people don't always get in their daily life. So I feel like whether you're a business owner or part of a sales team, you have that opportunity to make that difference in every conversation that you have with someone, which is like actually a really great thing to be doing right now, So anyway, I just want to remind people of that.
Yeah, no, that's actually, Janine makes a really good point here. Stephen Covey quote, where she says, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply, which goes back to, people are listening with their, exactly what you just said, Janine. Thank you. It's, and the reality too is that what you have to say isn't nearly as important as what the customer or prospect or anybody for that matter, I'm harking back to examples of people who are known for being such tremendous listeners. And two politicians come to mind, love them or hate them, doesn't really matter. But Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were both known to be amazing listeners. I remember the story about Barack Obama, where he went up to Sandy Hook and met with all the families that had their children, killed by in that mass shooting. And he spent like an hour with each family, right? It wasn't like a 1 minute, nice to meet you, I'm very sorry, please accept my condolences. We spent like an hour with each family, listening to them, talking about what they're going through. We don't always have that time in sales, right? Or with our partners, but same type of intent, the same type of really listening. And then here's the other thing too, Deborah, that we talk a lot about in the book that's so critical for sales. It's follow-up. We had a guest on the Sales Game Changers podcast. His name is Steve Richard. At the time, his company recorded conversations with sales prospectors and customers, and they did millions of phone calls. And I asked him, I said, what is the one thing you learned having listened to millions of phone calls? And he said, in over half the calls, there was no follow-up. Like, can we talk next Thursday? Or I'd like to call you to talk about this. He said they were blown away when they realized that. So those two things, when a lot of people think sales is hard because it's a skill, and you have a mission and it's a process, and especially when you sell software or technology or expensive things or conferences, there's a lot of people involved. You have to have proof. You have to meet the customer where they are. A macro event happens in the world that takes people's minds away from something. A micro event, someone's life is impacted with COVID or wherever it might be. But those two things, the ability to listen, if you can work on that, man, that's going to set you miles apart. And then if you can follow up, because so few people, Deborah, are good at both. And those are two of the critical skills. When we talk about, again, leadership strategies and prospecting and teamwork and partnering, but those two skills, if you could perfect those, you're going to be onto something big.
Yeah, definitely. A CRM can definitely help with that, with making it more organized, and kind of reminding people to do different kinds of follow-up at different times. And to a point you were making, I feel like this adds on to something you were saying, which is that make it clear in your follow-up what you want the person to do next. So recently I just sent a note to someone. Our next step is to have a conversation, which will be a project review call. And so they don't really need to do anything other than just show up to that appointment, right? So, but sometimes you might need something. You might need someone to sign something. You might want them to read something before the next conversation, just so they understand, your process or whatever it is, or maybe you're going to walk them through software, whatever it is. And just making that clear so that they know what that next step is kind of keeps things moving down, kind of keeps things progressing, basically. So I think we talked about this already, so I don't know if we may have already discussed this, but I was just kind of curious, what is a story of success around your sales book, in addition to the company that is ordering a bunch of copies?
Well, that was a big one. The sales book is, again, I published two. I published the line book and the sales book. I'll tell you one from the line book as compared to the sales book, because this fits in with both. Uh, I've not been shy to talk about Lyme disease and how much of an epidemic it is. And again, it personally impacted my family, the disease itself. And I'm the kind of person who just dove in to understand what was going on. So I haven't been shy. And on my LinkedIn posts every day, at the very bottom of every LinkedIn post, and I post something every day at 7:30. I have the Amazon link to the sales book and the Amazon link to the Lyme book. A sales VP who was once involved with the Institute and kind of moved on to other companies reached out to me last week. And she said, I've been seeing all your Lyme posts. I don't know if you know this or not, but I also have Lyme disease. And I'm going to get your Lyme book. And this is a high performing VP of sales at a company somewhere in the United States. And I reached out and I haven't spoken to this person in years. And I don't think I even interfaced online with this person. It's got to be 5 years. They were one of the first members of the Institute for Excellence in Sales. And we talked back and forth, and then we did a Zoom. And she said, you know what? She goes, we're going to get back involved with the Institute. And she just hadn't thought of it for whatever reason. And I was great. She bought the Lyme book. I don't know if she's read it or not yet, but she definitely was interested. We had a conversation, which then turned it into sales. So, the Lyme book was written, like I mentioned, it was written to bring peace to a community that is really, really struggling, the chronic Lyme world. It's just absolutely horrible. And it was published at the same time by me to kind of complement, audiences out there. They're both books that have been written to help people solve problems. And it was not unintentional that we published them both on the same day. They both came about for different reasons, right? But the Lyme book has given me the opportunity to connect with people that I probably wouldn't have connected with. If all I did was the sales book, I would have probably gotten interactions with prospects, because it's still, like we talked about in the beginning of the call, Deborah, it still gave me a reason. It's still a book, which people find value in just by publishing a book, which is actually fantastic. And me too. When someone sends me a book, good for them. I know what time and energy you put in. I know the work that you put in. It isn't easy, physically writing and publishing a book. But they're both written together to hopefully provide some value to the world, and they're both coming together to do that.
Yeah, and Fred has had so many wins, and his books came out roughly 30 days ago. So this is you're just getting started with this as far as the life of a book. And something else that I wanted to mention is that a lot of times one of the mistakes I see people make is that they have this launch around their book, and they're like, okay, now I'm done. But one of the things that I like to encourage people to think about differently, and I definitely mention this to my clients, is think about how does this tie into either your legacy or how does this tie into your business so that it's an evergreen book, which is part of the marketing foundation of your business. So for a typical business book, not the Lyme book, but more about the sales book, more focusing on that is more about like how it ties into your business at hand and the ways that you incorporate that into what you're doing. That way, sharing an Amazon, when people, I've just seen this happen in the past, not with anybody I know, but like they'll have like a big launch and then they're like, okay, now it's over. But I think there's some missed opportunities there sometimes to tie the book into what the person wants to do, whether it's grow a membership, speak, do corporate consulting or something else. And then of course, with legacy oriented books like the Lyme one, that's similar, maybe not related to business, but it's kind of similar. Like Fred can talk about that for years. It's not like he's going to stop talking about it in a month. So keep talking about your books is my point.
No, that's a great point. And actually, I work with a lot of people who've written multiple books, and they'll say to me, someone reached out to them because of a book they wrote 20 years ago. And it may not necessarily be where they are right now, but and same thing with podcasting too. I mean, I get people who reach out based on a podcast that we posted in 2017. Maybe they'll do a Google search on a particular person, and they'll see that they were on my show, and they'll reach out. But it's not a one and done. It's not an event. The great thing about the books is that they're always out there. People will discover them. They'll do a search, or they'll see it, or somebody will recommend. I've had people who've it's only been 30 days, which is unbelievable, but I've had people who made introductions. Hey, to somebody, you need to meet Fred. He's the author of Insights for Sales Game Changers. And whatever the conversation is, if it's going to be, hopefully a conversation that's going to have value for both of us, but, it gives people a reason for that as well is, I read this book, or even if they didn't read it, a lot of times they'll just know, you published this book. What a nicely, written book, and what a nice cover on Sales Game Changers. So it provides so much value, and for years. And again, it's only been 30 days for me, but I have so many people who've said they'll get calls for something they've written 25 years ago. And that's only like the 90s, right? So so it's not that long.
Just one last thing, feel free to say hi in the comments below so we can see who is here. And also check out Fred's Sales Game Changer podcast. It's fantastic. You can also go to his profile to get, every day he posts the links to his books. So if you're interested in those, feel free to go check out his content and follow him there. If you want to learn more about writing your business building book, more answers and help are available for you in the Publishing Success newsletter, which I write and which is free. It also covers how to get your articles published to raise your profile that way too, if you're not quite ready for a book. So in each, I almost said episode, but in each weekly letter, you'll get one publishing tip or writing prompt, a useful and doable step, as well as one, what I'm calling a wise surprise, but sort of a little surprise gift inside each weekly letter. So feel free, once again, check out the Sales Game Changers podcast, go to Fred's profile. You can find him that way, or check out the publishing Success newsletter. And again, if you're watching the replay, please type replay in the comments so that Fred and I know that you were here. And thank you guys so much. Thank you, Fred, for sharing your wisdom with us and sharing your experience with creating your books. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge you, Deborah. Again, we're getting a lot of nice comments here from people who enjoy the show. Thank you. I just want to acknowledge you for the work that you do. Again, you mentioned before that you've helped publish 37 books, including mine, and you're such an easy person to work with. You're such a pro at what you do. I just want to acknowledge you as what you do professionally to help people like me express to the world. There's no way I would have had the sales book. And for that matter, there's no way I would have had the line book either if I hadn't engaged you to assist in this process. So I just want to acknowledge you for the great job that you've done and for your continued success as well.
Thank you very much, Fred. I appreciate it. And to everyone who came today or is watching the replay later, Fred and I appreciate your presence and you taking the time to join us and asking your questions, or even if you were quiet, just watching, that's fine too. And so we want to thank you for your time, and we're so glad that you were here today. All right, take care, everyone, and I will talk to you all later.